Thanks very much. Good morning. We might just kick off with some general musings on the regulatory burden in Australia. How difficult is it to do business in this country based on regulatory compliance factors?
Did you want me to take that one, Alex?
Yeah.
Sure. I might kick us off. Danielle Wood, Chair of the Productivity Commission. What we found, we've recently completed 5 interim reports on productivity. There are different measures that you can draw on when thinking about the regulatory burden.
Yeah.
So some of those that we looked at included our rankings in various kind of global competitiveness scales. And what we found is that we've sort of tended to it looks like the burden has increased over time on a number of those different measures. We're currently doing some further work for the government looking at what might be the best measure or the best set of measures you might use to think about those issues.
So the OECD, the IMD, they do this sort of work. We appear to be trending in the wrong direction at the moment. Our trajectory seems to be heading south.
So certainly on the measures that we picked up for the report, that was the case. It suggested that the burden is increasing over time and has been over an extended period.
Yeah. So the IMD Competitiveness Index said that we fell 5 places in this last year. Why do you think that's happened?
Senator Alex Robson, Deputy Chair of the Productivity Commission. We haven't looked in the report specifically at the reason for that measure changing in the last year. What the general trend, though, shows over a number of years is that a number of measures, either collected by the World Bank or OECD, as you mentioned, have been going in the wrong direction, and that's the context in which we've constructed our report on regulatory burden and making draft recommendations to government.
In the last Parliament, there was 400 bills that passed into law. There was 5,000 new regulations, compliance costs of billions of dollars, 4.8 billion just on the laws themselves. What impact has that had?
So what the feedback we've gotten during our consultations from a range of groups, Senator, is that it does add to regulatory costs and the regulatory burden, including red tape and time taken for decisions and so on. And that is, it is part of the cost of regulation, but it doesn't take into account benefits, the broader benefits of regulation. And so that is part of the exercise that we're doing at the moment around quantification of regulatory burden in Australia and providing advice to government on quantitative measures that could be used on a forward-looking basis.
Well, that's interesting. So, as far as I can see, the last time anyone put some, I won't incorporate that into Hansard, it's not appropriate. That last time anyone did any kind of macro analysis on the compliance cost impact on GDP was about 10 years ago or something. I think at that time red tape was considered to be worth about 5% of GDP. Is that the sort of work you're looking at updating?
So it's more along the lines of a quantification of the regulatory burden. You could do it by GDP, or you could do it by number of restrictive clauses, or there's various measures that you could take that have been done in Australia and around the world, or you could just do a straight compliance burden approach and dollarising and valuing that. So there's different ways of doing it, and we're still considering those quantification measures.
That's very interesting. So when will that be made available?
So that'll go to government at the end of the year, and then final report, and then that'll be released in due course according to the government's decision.
Okay, so the PC has its own sort of funny rules. Is that a report that goes? It's not a public report. It goes to government, does it?
And then it gets tabled in Parliament.
Right. So it goes to the Treasurer, and he is able to consider it.
Correct.
We're doing it as part of those 5 productivity reports I mentioned, the Pillar 1 dynamic economy. So it will form part of that report. Once we hand it to the Treasurer, it needs to be released within 25 sitting days.
That's what I thought. There's some legislation. So you give it to the Treasurer this year, end of this year?
12th or 13th of December, yes.
Okay, and so then we would expect that sometime in February or March, perhaps we might see it.
Yeah, it's a decision of the
25
Treasurer,
sitting
but
days, is
within
it?
25 sitting days.
Yeah, well, you'd have to see it by, well, maybe you wouldn't. Well, Parliament doesn't sit much anymore. Maybe you'll see it in end of next year. But okay, but that's generally the approach on that. So then, what are the measures so far? We've talked about measures that have not enhanced productivity and in fact have added to the regulatory burden. What are the measures that the government have proposed which would improve productivity and reduce compliance costs?
And there are a number of announcements coming out of the Economic Reform Roundtable that come to mind.
Yep.
In the first term, the government abolished a whole lot of nuisance tariffs, which was in line with the Productivity Commission recommendation. They've announced another batch will be abolished, and we certainly think that is a pro-productivity compliance cost reducing measure. Some of the other announcements out of the roundtable around streamlining environmental approvals, pausing and then looking at the National Construction Code. Those are the types of measures that we have advocated before and the government is progressing.
So when you weigh up the abolition of a few nuisance tariffs against Future Made in Australia and 5,000 new regulations, 400 new laws, where does that balance sit?
Well, I mean, we're looking, as the Deputy Chair said, we are looking at measures that will effectively give a picture of how that has evolved over time.
Sure, but the nuisance tariffs, everyone thinks it's good to get rid of those, but it's pretty marginal, isn't it, given the scale of the regulatory burden?
I mean, a point that I've often made in debates is governments are going to have to do a whole lot of different things across a range of fronts. So I gave that as an example, but they're going to have to pursue a whole lot of different measures in order to reduce compliance burden and to boost productivity growth over time.
They're going to have to. So your evidence is they're going to have to reduce the regulatory burden to drive Australia's productivity. That's your evidence.
Our evidence is that would help improve Australia's productivity.
It would help. It would help. Fair enough. And we haven't yet seen what that's going to look like because you are providing some inputs into that.
I mean, I would say it's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing process. Okay. But I think a reasonable person would expect that if you're doing all this scoping work of the regulatory burden, then you would be expecting there to be more action.
I think there has been, as I said, a number of things, just as an example, coming out of the Economic Reform Roundtable. We've put a number of other proposals on the table as part of these reports and we'll send the final to government at the end of the year. Okay.
I have to say, I thought you did a good job with the report which looked at the Office of Impact Analysis. So effectively your position is that the Department of PMC, it does a job at the moment. It's been doing that job for a long time under a lot of different governments. How effective is it?
So we looked at this in the Pillar 1 interim report, Senator, and so the Office of Impact Analysis has been around, in various forms for several decades. It was once part of the Productivity Commission in its previous life at the ABPR, and it's an important part of Australia's regulatory gatekeeping architecture. It regulates helps control the flow of regulation in the sense that it provides advice to governments on and regulators on costs and benefits and impacts of regulation. It doesn't make regulatory decisions or policy decisions, but it's an important part of that process. What we found in the report, based on our own analysis and feedback from various places, was that the advice that it's providing to government, and this has been over, it's not a recent thing, that it's not that well timed in the decision-making process. So that could be done in a better way. And also, we've made a draft recommendation around an independent commissioner should be in charge of or oversee that Office of Impact Analysis. It would still sit within PMC, but it would give it that additional bit of independence without taking it right outside of government, so it still has that contact with government decisions and can still remain relevant in that regard.
So why do you recommend that the head of the OAI would be independent?
Well, as I said, Senator, it's a process that's important for government decisions, but it should be overseen by someone who is willing to give frank and fearless advice. That's
you don't think the Prime Minister's Department is doing that?
I'm not saying that at all, Senator. I'm just saying that that is part of beefing up that process in the sense, as I described earlier, that the decisions that are taken within government with respect to that advice, the timing is off, and the advice is often not provided in a way that's useful for decision makers, and that's been the case for a significant period of time.
So the evidence they gave on Monday was that they had considered the 400 bills in the last Parliament. That I think in a couple of cases asked there to be some more work done, but in effect it felt like it was a bit of a rubber stamp, which I think in fairness has been a rubber stamp for a long time preceding this particular government. So effectively your advice is that it needs to be strengthened, it needs to be independence, so that you do, in your language, get frank and fearless advice, no imputation intended. And so what has been the response to that particular proposal
From
government?
Well, it's an interim report, so we wait. It's up to the government whether in the final report they adopt that recommendation or not.
What sort of process would usually occur for a proposal like that?
Well, the government would either accept it or not accept it.
But the government responds to all your reports?
Not formally. No.
Not always?
No.
Senator Bragg, we're going to have to